Hello, and welcome back to the next episode of this Healthy Life podcast. I'm very excited for my guest today. I have Dr. Park, who is a Harvard and Columbia trained doctor, and he's been realizing that your body can do its own healing. And for the last 6 years, he's been using stem cell exosomes to help himself, family, patients, and other people that need to heal from chronic illness and using this natural biohack that we have available to us. So, Dr. Park, thank you so much for joining today. This is a topic that I'm super excited about. As some of you know, if you've been following along on my blog and my journey, I did stem cell therapy in 2016 to recover from Lyme disease. I've done 2 different versions of stem cells since, and I also did exosome therapy. So this is all a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. And so happy to have an expert on here today to share his wisdom. So welcome. Thank you so much for joining.
Great. Thanks, Erica. Happy to help.
Yeah, awesome. So I'd love for you to start with a quick introduction about yourself and how you got into, working with exosomes, which are, something that's obviously been around forever, but something that's very new and kind of up and coming in the health and regenerative medicine field.
Sure. So I trained in OBGYN. I did that for like 17 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then my path took me more towards regenerative medicine. I started to do telomerase activators, which I've been taking for 17 years now. So at age 57, I don't really have much gray hair and don't die, no reading glasses. So that's what I've been doing for 17 years. A lot of people have been on that journey with me for 15 years or more.
Mm-hmm.
And then 6 years ago, I became aware of exosomes after hearing a lecture. There was a doctor who had had a motorcycle crash, broke a bunch of ribs, collarbone, ankle. And he was up there laughing 4 weeks later. I said, well, either he's full of it or there's something. So I tried it on my knee, fixed my meniscus, my Achilles, and my rotator cuff. So then slowly I started opening up to friends and family. I just got a call from my sister this morning, who was the biggest skeptic. She's like 60 with like really bad arthritis. And she's like, yeah, I have to admit, it is kind of helping. So it's just something that is based on the way that we normally heal. So if you twist your ankle, you'll release a bunch of stem cells in response to the inflammation, which will secrete exosomes. So now we just cut to the chase and give the exosomes. And it just gets you healing at a remarkably fast pace.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. So let's talk a little bit about what exactly exosomes are and what the difference is between exosomes and stem cells, and if you can just kind of share some knowledge on that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the thing they share is that they both can do regenerative things, as you experienced by getting your autologous stem cell transplant. The problem that people don't really understand is that stem cells are cells. So they're a few microns in diameter. Exosomes are tiny. They're 1/300th, 1/500th the diameter. So they're literally invisible. When we thaw them, you can't see them with any light microscope. You need electron microscope. So they are tiny. They're like the little words or songs or packages that cells send to each other to modulate their behavior. So lucky for us, we're starting to learn that you don't really even need the stem cells, because when you take someone else's stem cells, all the studies show that they're gone within a few days, especially if they're from, like a sheep or something. But even from someone that's like your daughter or your mom, it's only 50% matched. But in terms of the molecular handshake of self versus foreign, they might as well be from a sheep. So other people's stem cells will last a day or two, but then your immune system will clear them. During that time, they'll secrete exosomes, which is great. But unlike the other things that people used to do with prolotherapy and PRP, which cause inflammation, which bring in stem cells, which secrete exosomes, now for the last 6 years, I've just been treating people with exosomes, and the results are very good.
Awesome. And so you mentioned orthopedic conditions that exosomes can be really helpful for, but in your scope of practice, what are other conditions that you've seen exosomes helping people? Are they helping people with autoimmune conditions or neurodegenerative diseases, or is it mostly orthopedic applications?
I mean, great question. The thing about it is that it's really how your body heals naturally. So whenever you give like a million times more than what you're already making, good things tend to happen. So like, for example, we have, nerve damage, Bell's palsy, facial pain. I've never treated a stroke patient that didn't have some positive improvement. Um, a lot of neuropathies we have good success with, but also, as you say, autoimmune conditions, that's kind of our low-hanging fruit too. Because for a month or two at least, your immune system will simmer down, and so that can be really helpful. Our most popular procedure, I've done over 2,200 procedures, is actually nasal injection, which kind of leaks into the brain through the base of the skull. So people find they have better focus. Sometimes their mood improves, memory. So that's something that you can get on top of in terms of prevention of dementia, Alzheimer's. once somebody is really sick with Alzheimer's, it's probably too late. But yeah, no, we have a lot of success with neurological stuff, autoimmune, and like I said, MSK.
Awesome. And then, so are there certain candidates that you wouldn't be a good candidate for exosomes, or is anyone out there? I mean, you just mentioned that if you're too far along with like dementia or Alzheimer's or something like that, you may not be a great candidate. But are there certain conditions that don't do well for exosomes, or exosomes could create a more inflammatory effect that could worsen conditions?
In general, I would say no, but there's a caveat with that. So about 1 in 20 times, people with pre-existing herpes viruses, like cold sores that 80% of people get, they can get a flare, especially if they're stressed out. So oftentimes we'll give them a Valtrex as preventative measure. I say the only really bad side effects we've seen is, some people get activation of chickenpox or shingles. That's happened, I've heard, twice in my experience. So, but if you're on top of that, you can prevent that. Good example, a patient came down from Utah to see me, and she got shingles, but thank God she didn't get any neuralgia. But she's so happy about the results otherwise. And she was like, oh my God, I used to be a zombie. I couldn't talk or speak or walk. And she was super happy, so much so that she referred like 6 of her friends and family. So it's all basically word of mouth for my practice. But once you believe, you want to get more and more treatments. Like myself, I've done probably 30 treatments, 40. My mom has done almost 50. Or, it's just once you know it can help, you just go to it and it does the trick.
And that's a great question. So I'm glad you brought that up. So I did exosomes once, and I don't feel like I really felt too much from them, especially when I compare it to like, kind of like the high I got from my stem cells and when I've done those.
Right.
So you mentioned having to do it a couple of times. Obviously, you've done it many times, but is it something that someone has to do every like 2 to 3 months or twice a year? Or
No,
like what's kind of like the magic number to kind of continue to
I
have
mean,
that
listen,
benefit from it?
well, number one, the problem is that there are about a dozen exosome companies just in this country alone. I'm super skeptical as to whether the quality is the same. It's not like going to Chevron, Texaco, Mobil. It's gas, right? So a lot of these companies, I'm not sure they have the same process of isolation, extraction, and people fudge the numbers a lot. So it's really unclear to me whether, you even got the good stuff. That's the first thing. But as far as dose, like if there was no uh, concern about cost, I think people should have it as a human right. I mean, I think they should get it all the time. One fellow in San Fran gets it 24 billion every month, and he's feeling great at 78. So if people could afford it, I mean, there's nothing it can't help with. Like the therapeutic index is super wide. Now, having said that, if you pick up my book, I explain that there are some people who are a little bit more like exosomes, yeah, songs of healing. I do have a chapter on immune dysregulation. So, as you well know, when people have Lyme, they have mold, their immune system is dysregulated. So, it doesn't generally help those underlying conditions. But, you can help some of the symptomatology. I just got a text yesterday from a patient in Monrovia with Lyme disease, and her hips were undergoing avascular necrosis. Like her whole spinal canal is
Wow.
melting. So the
Wow.
pain is like 80% better now. She's no longer a cripple in bed. But is it helping the underlying or Lyme? Probably for that, you need either antibiotics, who knows, ozone, Ibu. There are other things that people do. Someone I met just 2 days ago said they cured their Lyme with homeopathy, with bee sticks. So, whenever you're dysregulated, my warning is like if someone says, "Oh, I just tested positive for COVID," I'm like, "Let's cancel," because your immune system will go kind of dark and it'll go into regeneration mode. So that can be a little scary.
So, okay, so those
But
are instances where you need to be a little bit more cautious about the application or the timing of the application, at least, of the
exactly, the
exosomes.
timing and the patient selection. Like if I can share this one thing, like the best. People always ask me, "Well, what's the best case you've ever seen?" So I'll show you
Mm-hmm.
this Hungarian guy who just came as a lark with his 2 buddies who got really good benefits. And you can see here, this guy took copious notes. Like he had these varicose veins on his legs
Mm-hmm.
and little spider veins, and they started to fade. By day 10, they were just
Wow.
gone. Yeah.
That's
And
amazing.
then, and the eczema on his hands, gone. And his face, the facial swelling, he's gone.
Wow. It's like
Yeah.
a different
And he's
person.
a different person. Yeah. So
Yeah.
he totally healed, like these spider veins everywhere. And the only reason that's the best case is because he had what's called leaky gut and mast cell activation. I know that
Mm-hmm.
through your journey, you've had the celiac. So
Mm-hmm.
basically, the tight junctions are no longer tight. So this fella
Yep.
had uh, food particles spilling into his bloodstream, which triggered global histamine reaction, which caused eczema, varicose veins, and puffiness. And all
Mm-hmm.
that disappeared after 2 weeks. It's just the
That's
only
crazy.
possible reason is that his tight junctions just tightened up. So that's
Mm-hmm.
crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So is that a good use of the exosomes also? I mean, the gut health is such a big prominent thing that everyone's kind of
Yeah.
concerned about these
I
days,
mean,
and there's so many different theories on gut health and how to heal it. So is this something that you've seen
literally, that is
helping with
like
that?
a fluke. Yeah, that was a total fluke. I don't promise people that. When they ask me, like, what's the best? I'm like, that is clearly the
Yeah.
best. I mean, one
Yeah.
shot for that kind of lifestyle change and symptoms is remarkable. I do have a friend who battles a lot with Crohn's disease. So it tends to quiet her down for a couple of weeks. But again, there are underlying things in the gut dysbiosis, in the psycho-emotional framework that helps to generate that. Obviously the autoimmune capacity, the meds in the mix. So yeah, I mean, I think it can help, but everything, like you said, is individualized. The timing of it, how often, uh, everything is complex. And that's what, even though I was trained as allopathic, you start to realize that the true functional, integrative functional causes are complicated, right? So you hear great things about like fecal stool transplant. Like who,
Yep.
who would have thought? But I've heard a lot of great anecdotes and there's good literature now. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very interesting topic as well. It's a whole other podcast.
yeah.
That's awesome. So, when you are preparing to get exosomes, what are some things that people should do to prepare to kind of maximize their treatment? So, you mentioned not doing it when you have like any sort of illness going on or infection, because that can kind of, hamper the results. But what are some other things that people can do? Is there any sort of kind of pre treatment or like ozone or herbs or supplements or anything that you can take to enhance their results?
I mean, that's a
Or,
great question. For my practice, I don't use energy modalities, but a lot of people do. Like, for example, they'll use pulse wave or Eswal to heat up and inflame. But I don't think it's good to keep on doing that because I think that kind of sets the clock back to day zero. I remember this one lady put like a bunch of really expensive exosomes on her shoulder, and every week or every few days, she was hitting it with energy, ultrasound, heat. So you kind of like start the clock at day zero inflammation wise.
Mhm.
So my
Yeah.
point of view, there's no real prep, but you shouldn't have an active viral infection. You shouldn't have an active undiagnosed cancer because theoretically that could be a problem. But it's mainly in the aftercare that we get problems. People, their pain that they've had for months or years goes away and they think they're totally healed. But it takes 2 or 3 months to make new collagen structures. So the things I've seen a few times is people don't really listen. So I had to underline and bold it instructions. Just because you don't have pain doesn't mean you're healed. So that's the weird thing. The pain goes away. So people start like bench pressing or doing all this crazy like CrossFit stuff, and then they re-injure something, or you know, that's the real problem because the natural
Yeah.
pain, unlike the Marines, it's not weakness leaving your body. It's a warning that you're about to get injured.
Mhm.
So
And so much
that's
of
the
that
main.
pain is often from inflammation and things like that, right? So I'm sure like the exosomes kind of
Yeah.
go in
So
and
once
calm
you
that
feel the
inflammation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Like I'll give you an example, gout, which my brother, sister, and mom have. I had my first episode of gout a few years ago after some 2 buck chuck and my feet were sticking out of the covers. And I was like, what is this? I woke up, I'm like, oh, this must be gout.
Mm,
And I injected it and the pain went away. I mean, luckily there's nothing, riding literally on my big toe knuckle. But if you can imagine, if you take away the pain from like a tendon that's like on the verge of rupture, and you go out and you play like 5 sets of tennis, you could be in trouble if you've taken the pain away.
hmm. So let's talk a little bit more. You touched on it slightly there. So aftercare. So after you get your exosomes, you said not to do a lot of these interventions because you're kind of resetting the clock. Is there other things that you need to do while you're healing? You said it could take like 2 to 3 months, for injuries to heal and things like that. What if you're using exosomes for, say, like a chronic condition? Are there certain things that you should do or shouldn't do afterwards to kind of support your
Yeah,
body
it's,
to use the exosomes?
it's such a great question, and it's very individualized. Nobody really knows. Every time I've done it, and I haven't done it that much, I usually just do it for injuries. the experience is totally different. Like you have changed your appetite, bowel movements. The one thing I would say is that nearly everybody, like 2/3, feel sleepy for like up to 36 hours, and your body's just, I guess, shutting down and going into recovery. Uh, Other than that, sometimes, I don't eat that great. So one time I remember I took an IV and I had this craving for green salads, like leafy vegetables. So I guess in general, the things that you would do, sleep, hydrate, think good thoughts, placebo effect is real, eat healthy. Those are good things. I wouldn't take a 36-hour flight to Dubai and binge drink alcohol. But no, but there's actually an interesting point. Like people who are on biologics for immune suppression and chronic steroids, I do, in my experience, think that the effect is lessened because somewhat of an intact immune system is needed for the good effects too. My experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I want to touch on mast cell activation a little bit. So you mentioned, that's something that is so common these days. Like so many people, whether they're dealing with Lyme or any other infection, even people without Lyme are somehow dealing with mast cell activation too. How do exosomes help in that? Do they kind of rev up the immune system more that it can worsen the mast cell activation, or are you finding that it's helping to kind of calm those things?
Definitely calm. Yeah, I mean, if we can say anything, the phenotype or the way the immune system behaves generally mellows out. And that can have good and bad effects, but it's generally good. But yeah, I mean, there's so many triggers in our diet and our environment, even in our emotional systems, that it definitely shuts down that kind of activation. I just treated a friend, mom who's 97. She's got pretty bad dementia, but at least her, sinusitis, her allergies are better. Whether we can fix her brain, I'm not sure. But she was pretty bad off. She couldn't even
Mm-hmm.
subtract by two or
Mm-hmm.
remember any words, and she couldn't draw a clock. So, you know, you do what you can. But like the time that you did exosomes, they might have been not as potent, or you might have just been in a good place. If someone is in a good place in terms of their health and their homeostasis, you're not going to see an effect, right? So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that makes
That's
sense.
amazing that you did the autologous. It was in Europe, right?
Yeah, in Germany. So
That's
it was stem
really
cells from my own fat. And actually that's a good question that leads into my next question. So, you know, so many times everyone's like, you have to use your own stem cells. And you even mentioned, if you get them from like someone that's 50% related to you, like your body still kind of clears them out. So
yeah,
exosomes obviously aren't from your own body. Those are,
right, right,
from something else. So why is it that exosomes are able to kind of stay in the body and continue working even though they're not
right.
autologous?
Right. So that I just attended a conference with 1,000 PhDs from 100 countries. These are the experts, and there's not a lot that they know. Like their biggest humble brag is to say, "Oh, I published papers that were totally wrong for years." But the one thing
Hmm.
that we do know for sure is that on a 100 nanometer sphere, there's no room and there's no antigens for self. So the MHC antigens that tell you if something is you or foreign,
Hmm.
those don't exist on exosomes. So
Mm.
your body can't figure out it didn't make them. So all of a sudden you're healing like a newborn baby, which is where they come from, a newborn baby. So there's no mechanism we know for them to be rejected.
Hmm. Do you think at a certain point exosomes are going to get to the point that they can replace having to use stem cells, or do you think there's still a time and a place to use stem cells versus exosomes?
I mean, that's a great question. The problem that taking care of stem cells, growing them, multiplying them, nurturing them, is not easy to do. It's really more of like an art. Um, it's a craft. So not everyone does a great job, and from batch to batch, there's variance. But I do think that because Arnold Kaplan was the pioneer, he's the one who named the mesenchymal stem cell. Towards the end of his career, he published a paper saying you don't even need the stem cells; you just need the exosomes because that's how they work anyway. Even in my first book about telomeres, I mistakenly said, well, the stem cells go and they engraft and they become muscles. But even though that's true in the dish, that's not necessarily true. It might be true-ish in the body. We don't really know. But yeah, in the future, they'll have exosomes from neurologic cells that are better growing myelin sheaths, let's say, uh, ones from bone that are better at growing bone. So, there's no reason why you need to hire the Rolling Stones. You can just play their music, right? So we just have the music. We don't need the whole band there. But once you introduce, again, not self stem cells, then, they have a limited lifespan. So that's the problem. But the autologous, the problem is when you do a fat lipo like you did, it's not that easy to find the three types of stem cells. Like there's mesenchymal, endothelial, and hematopoietic. They're very rare. Most of what you get is like fat and schmutz and connective tissue. So you have to really have some like really experienced PhDs to isolate them. If they're going to multiply them, clonally expand them to billions and billions and billions, that's not easy to do. I mean, there's people who do that in different countries, but it's not really ready for prime time in this country
Yeah, and I
because
feel like they're cracking down on stem
yeah,
cells here too, and really kind of like all over the world. So it's kind of you either have the choices of doing like cord blood, which is obviously donor ones that everyone I know that has tried those, they feel good for a little bit, and then all of a sudden they're kind of right back to where they were because your immune
yeah,
system just is clearing those out. And then embryonic, there's obviously the ethical issues with it as well as
they're
like
not,
they're not self-limiting, so they're not safe, right? So what is it with exosomes? You mentioned that if you have cancer, obviously you don't want to probably do this, but I know with embryonic stem cells, that's a huge risk, right? Because the tumors will just multiply indefinitely because it's not self-limiting. But what about exosomes? Are they self-limiting? Like, what is the risk if you
oh,
do have a tumor that you don't know about? Like, are you at risk for having
yeah.
issues with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's right there on my consent. I mean, on my consent, it says this is not FDA approved, it's not standard of care, it's not guaranteed. And then farther down, it says, if you have an undiagnosed cancer, don't do it. Now, having said that, there's no real great reason to believe, other than the fact that exosomes promote new blood vessel generation, which is one of the mechanisms of metastasis. But just as far as caution goes, that and wet macular degeneration, which is vascular proliferative, we generally say no. Having said that, there's anecdotes. There's people who say that their cancer got better. It's like the opposite of chemo, right? Chemo is like bad for all cells, especially stem cells. That's where your hair falls out, you get diarrhea, your gut sloughs. So it's the opposite. Like exosomes are good for all stem cells. So it's just more of a caution thing that we prefer to get that taken care of, have that be in the past before we start, boosting all your cells.
Yeah. Are there certain tests that people should do before they do exosomes, or any lab work that they need to do to kind of verify that they're in a healthy state to receive the exosomes?
Not really. I mean, you can get them. I mean, you're making them constantly all the time. Even if you get a paper cut, boom, inflammation, stem cells, exosomes. So this is just naturally happening. But if you can get them in a spot where your body stopped trying to heal, like a tennis elbow or an Achilles, then they can kind of wake up, de-differentiate, multiply, decrease inflammation. So it's kind of like spackle almost, but it really reprograms the local cells to kind of try and repair again. And that's where we see the benefits.
Do you think there's ever going to be a time where you're able to harvest your own exosomes instead of
I
having
mean,
donor
you
ones?
can, but it's just not cost effective. It's not
Yeah.
scalable, to hire, an N of one experiment for you. I mean, there's places you can fly to, you can read about in the book, where you could drop 80 grand and they'll give you GM-CSF and your bone marrow will squirt out stem cells and they claim they can isolate them, multiply them to millions and millions, freeze them, and you just, I mean, it's a good biohack. If you really were
Yeah.
interested in not dying, then the best way is to get a bunch of your best version stem cells, create hundreds of millions of them and then intermittently reintroduce them as needed. So we talk a lot about aging and how to hack it. So I know there's a lot of people who are in that space, but I like to just dumb it down, keep it real common sense. I mean, there's chapters in the book that I don't even understand, and I wrote them. It gets really complicated. But yeah, we try and stick to the science. It's nice to have ideas and experience and anecdotes, but there should be, animal studies proving this. Like, so the questions you're asking are all really good. And it's not that, I want to withhold information, but, I'm just sort of working with this empirically too. And so nobody's really an expert. Like some people will mix PRP with exosomes, stem cells with exosomes. I personally don't because I think it's too immune suppressive the couple of times I've done that. But yeah, I would say that the other old stuff, the PRP is a little cheaper, but it's a little cumbersome. It's great, but now in this new world, we don't need the inflammation. Like, PRP, it sometimes doesn't work if you're older because the platelets have their own exosomes, they're not as effective. But then they also tell you can't take ibuprofen or aspirin or Tylenol
With the
because
PRP.
they're looking for inflammation. This is the
Hmm.
opposite. Like if you've ever seen the vampire facial that Kim Kardashian did, they're very red for like 5 days. This is the opposite. They barely even look sunburned the next day because it's so anti-inflammatory. So I
Mm.
think that's really where we leverage the benefit because your body goes from inflammation right to regeneration.
Hmm. Gotcha. So let's talk about how you get exosomes. So you mentioned like for orthopedic conditions, do you inject it directly into the site of something that needs the
Yeah.
healing? And then what about say for like a autoimmune disease or chronic condition? Is it an IV? That's how I got them. I did an IV of them, but is
Generally.
that generally still kind of the
Yeah.
methods that you use to apply them?
Correct. Yeah. I mean, if somebody has really bad rheumatoid knuckles, then we might do into the knuckles as well. But IV is generally the way to go. Yeah.
Okay. And
Yeah.
then I want to switch gears a little bit. So you mentioned telomeres and that you've been, working in that scope for a while and preventing gray hair, which is something I would love to learn
Oh yeah.
about. So I'd love for you to share. Let's start kind of just with the basics, like what are telomeres and kind of just explain kind of the breakdown of what happens as we age and how they shorten and why that happens.
Yeah. I've written 3 books. One is Telomere Time Bombs. One is The Telomere Miracle, and this third one is Exosomes. But I think that this last book, Exosome Songs of Healing, talks about aging. That's really simple if you think about it. And this is very established science, 2008 Nobel Prize. The ends of your chromosomes have telomeres. They're like fuses on firecrackers. Every time a cell divides, they shorten a fixed amount. Or. So there's enzymes in stem cells only that can re-lengthen these, making them effectively immortal. So it just basically keeps the stem cells from aging out as quickly. And so the benefits, I feel like I haven't had to dye my hair and, wear reading glasses. Like 17 years ago, I was having gray hair and reading glasses. So I
Wow.
just feel like it's flattened that curve for me. And now with the exosome, we actually get stem cell regeneration, dedifferentiation. So that's really exciting. But the third part of the puzzle is like cell suicide and senescence and destruction. That's the part we don't really have mastered yet. But if people are interested in aging generally, then the Exosomes book is good because it explains it in terms of the analogy and how to best conquer that. Because like in the future, if people really wanted to conquer aging, they would freeze their placentas. And then like every decade they get a reinfusion of their healthy young stem cells. Everyone would have their own bespoke stem cell bank. And then that whole, curve of us aging and dying would just get
Mm-hmm.
flattened out really far.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what are your thoughts on banking stem cells? So, I know that's a more common practice these days. Obviously, still expensive and inaccessible to a lot of people. But like one theory is like when you bank the stem cells want to differentiate into some sort of cell in your body. So unless you use them right away, they might start kind of changing into cells that they want to become. But what are your thoughts on freezing them and using them years later versus using them
Yeah.
right away?
Great question. When I was delivering babies, a lot of times, we'd freeze the cord blood, we'd send it off. I mean, that's great. That's like, there's a bunch of stem cells in cord
Yeah.
blood. Even better is in low tech is to freeze the placenta. Because when you thaw it in the future, you might lose 20% of viability, but you still have a lot of, you don't have to unfreeze the whole thing at once. So you have a lifetime supply of your OEM sort of hardware. So, women these days, they get a job at Google at 35, and part of the package is you freeze your eggs. Same thing. You're freezing a type of stem cell in the hopes that in the future you can use it. Indeed, that's a viable technology. But yeah, if people were like not interested in fighting wars, they could like allocate their money to freezing their placenta, having replacement parts. Like it would be a game changer. Now, people always wander into questions of economics and social justice, but like the actual way to store your stem cells, to extract them, and once you extract them, they're in stasis. Like they're not doing anything when they're frozen in liquid nitrogen. But once the scientist gets them out, remember I said in my first book they differentiate into cartilage, bone, muscle. That's one of the very easy, trivial things that stem cell scientists do. They're so proud of it. They give a couple of proteins or signals, and that MSC will become a muscle or a bone or cartilage. So they think that's pretty cool. I think that's pretty cool. But in the future, like, there's no reason why that blueprint in those stem cells that you've saved couldn't be made into like liver, lung, kidney, heart. So it's a pretty easy biohack, but of course you have to follow money. Like, who's making money off of that?
Yeah.
You know?
And then what about freezing and banking stem cells as an adult? Like say, you're in your 30s or 40s and you're like, hey, I want to have some stem cells for when I'm older. Are they still viable? And if you are going to bank them, what's the best source of it? Bone marrow, blood,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
fat?
that's a great question. Not my area of expertise. 25-year-old, I said to him, well, look, if you hit the lottery, if you come into a lot of money, it might be a good thing to do because 25-year-old is better than 35, 45, 75. I mean, even now at 57, like my stem cells are better than they're going to be at 67. There's always some benefit, but the best benefit is newborn placenta. And it costs you $300 to freeze that, and then you're set for life. Because the thing is that the original use case for the cord blood was, well, if the sibling gets leukemia, and this is such rare, but everybody who's ever lived gets older and degenerates and gets sick. So now we have the stem cell technology has gotten to the point where they can actually make a useful product for you. Because even though you're not 100% matched to yourself, it's pretty darn close. And like you said, the embryonic stem cells are not safe because they have too much potentiality. They can
Yep.
form what's called teratomas. But for our intents and purposes, newborn baby placenta is an adult. It no longer has that pluripotency that the embryonic cells have. So they're really safe. They're adult, but they're super potent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Awesome. And then, so going back to telomeres, so let's talk a little bit about what we can do to help us with anti-aging and extending those. So is it certain sort of supplements that you need to take, or is it lifestyle changes that you need to make to help support that? Or what do we need to do to live longer and healthier lives?
Yeah, I mean, there's a supplement that I've been taking for 17 years, and you can Google it. One of my patients, his immune system totally recovered from like an 80-year-old to a 20-year-old because he
Wow.
had some weird infant. When he was an infant, he had like that boy in the bubble thing. So that really helped him. But he was into Bitcoin in 2011, so he's sitting on God knows how much for life. But even he has experimented with the generic forms of this molecule, and he admits that they're probably not as potent. So the product that I used to make, I used to check the potency, and but sometimes manufacturers they cut corners. But the one that I'm taking is pretty potent. It's pretty active. They can learn more about it on my website. But if you want to do anything for free, spoiler alert, like read my book for Hay House I wrote called The Telomere Miracle. And it turns out that just like you think, anything that's good for you generally is good for your telomerase activity. So good sleep, good thoughts, exercise, maybe a Mediterranean diet. Um, all these things, they're like 6 different aspects that are scientifically proven to increase telomerase. So it's nothing too shocking, but
Yeah.
there's data to suggest it's real. So
And then are there any negatives that you found to, I mean, obviously, like we're kind of reversing something that our bodies are naturally doing. Like, are there any risks in
yeah,
lengthening
great
your
question.
telomeres?
Great question. I used to test my telomeres with 4 different labs every year. And every year they were like really much different. Like the numbers were like totally, but year over year, the labs were the same, right? So they were using different methodologies. But the thing I was checking for was, are these telomeres getting uncontrollably long, like dreadlocks? And the answer was no. Yeah, so I stopped testing them. But yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any downside. I think I've had 2 patients get cancer and they both survive, and that's out of thousands. So that's kind of less than the threshold.
Yeah.
And I think generally it's very anti-cancer. And I've got lectures, you can see them on YouTube about that. It's a controversy, but in general, the syndromes where there's telomerase inactivation, they get premature aging and they get premature, of course, heart disease, cancer, and all that. So in a lot of ways, the shortening of the telomeres causes the stem cell damage and depletion, and that's really what aging and most of our diseases are caused by, is by
Mm-hmm.
that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then if people do want to test their kind of biological age or the length of their telomeres, what's a good resource to do that with?
Um, it's the Bitcoin billionaire guy was telling me he's aging at 0.76 years a year, so below. I turned him on to this one test out of Spain called Life Length, and we both agree that they messed up by changing their measurement. In the early days, the doctors couldn't understand what critical short telomeres are, so they dropped that. That was the most useful information. That's really what changed him from boy in the bubble and chronically sick to like a young, healthy man again. And that was when he was in his 30s. So none of them are great. Like I said, I would measure my telomeres. One would be 7,000, 9,000, 11, and 13,000. So they're using different methodologies. That's the problem. But I think the critically short one is the important number, because those are the firecracker fuses that are just about to go off. So you don't want a lot of variation in that. You don't want a lot of short telomeres. You just want a good average length. What's come up in the last 7 years is something called epigenetic testing. So there's different models. There are first like 300, now there's 500, now there's 1,000 gene loci. So they look at whether the gene is methylated or not methylated. And there's like a tight 95% correlation with your age and your methylation. Now, what that means is really up to debate, and I've blogged about that. That's a good way that people are using to measure. But the best measure of your age is right there on your driver's license, birth date, because we're all getting older. There are things that you can do, but it's not that easy to mitigate. But as long
Yeah.
as you're feeling good, like if you're like my mom's 87 and she's feeling good, functional in every way, really, they say age is just a number, but
Yeah.
really, I mean, it's all about the stem cell depletion game. That's the
Hmm.
main thing you got to worry about.
And so much, I mean, you mentioned it before, having positive thoughts. I think mindset is such a positive
Oh
thing that
yeah,
impacts you. My grandma is 100 years old, but she's like one of the most positive people I know. Like she's always just like, seems so carefree and has a positive attitude. And then you see other people that are so sick and they're like, the world's out to get them, and
oh
everything
my
is
God,
like against them, and they watch the news and things like that. And it's like, no wonder you're aging and feeling sick
yeah.
and anxious.
But that's the journey, like
Yeah.
for all of us. Like in every moment, it's like, are we going to be the hero or the victim of our story? I had one lady, she was 114 years old, and she
Wow.
started taking the TA65, and she was getting black hairs every month.
No way.
Yeah, it was crazy. I've seen that in 92-year-old women just after exosomes. But so people love it when their hair turns black. They feel like viscerally it's something that they really.
They
But
see the proof.
yeah. But at the end of the day, it's like I just got the phone right before you called with this lady. She has MS since the age of 30, and she's like, "Yeah, I'm really feeling like a victim, and I was so mean to everyone, and now that the home health caregivers won't come see me." We just talked about that, because once you're in that whole scarcity
Yeah,
mentality, I mean, I told her about people that were a million times worse. It doesn't make you feel better to know that someone's worse, but certainly you're right. When you're thinking about abundance and gratitude, then all the little cells in you start to be a little more aligned too. Yeah, people make themselves sick all the time for
absolutely.
psychological, generational, maybe even past
Or keep
life.
themselves sick when they don't feel
Yeah,
like they can heal or like deserve to heal.
well, it just becomes such a part of their identity, right? Because there's that
Absolutely.
secondary gain, like people take care of you in a different way. They
Yeah.
seem concerned. It's hard to escape that. Let's be
Yeah.
honest.
I see it a lot with Lyme too, like people that are recovering from Lyme or have had it their whole life, like they almost like make it part of their identity and
Oh yeah,
like and I'm like the like don't give it that much ownership. Like you aren't this disease. Like this disease is just something that you happen to experience, but it's not a part of you. And like the more you can kind of think of it that way and be like, this isn't
totally.
part of me, it needs to go, I feel
Yeah,
like people heal a lot better. So
for sure. Absolutely.
awesome. Well, this has been amazing. I want to switch gears just for a second as we wrap up and talk about your book. I haven't had a chance to fully dive into it yet, but I'm very excited to read this. So, what can people expect to find in the book, and what sort of information is in here?
Yeah, yeah. So that's basically talks about what's an exosome versus stem cell. How do they work? What's the animal studies like in heart attack, stroke, arthritis? Where are we at with the FDA, how to find a doctor, just things like that. And there are chapters. I literally like wrote the chapter on immunology. I don't even understand it, even though I wrote it. I did at the time, but it's super complicated. So it's never
Yeah.
meant to overwhelm people, but we try and keep it light, a lot of anecdotes, analogies. If you just know there's no quiz at the end, I think you'll get a really good understanding about what aging is, how your body systems work, and yeah, no, it's just a fun little journey. Talks a little bit about how I got into this. But yeah, it's just a good resource. And at the end, there's like, dozens of blogs, videos, webinars that I've done. It's all there accessible for free as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Amazing. And if people want to find you and get exosomes, what's the best way to reach out to you here? Are you just doing it here in California, in the Los Angeles area, or do you work with
No,
patients across the
I
country?
actually am I have licensed in 5 states. So I live in LA currently, but I used to live in Hawaii. So I go there. I go to San Fran every month. I'm going to Dallas, Miami, New York. So that's Texas, Florida, New York.
Okay.
And I'll probably be adding Utah soon. Yeah, no, people can book a free 20-minute consult on my website. That's
Awesome.
www.rechargebiomedical.com. and they can watch all my videos going back 17 years now on YouTube at DRPARK65.
Amazing. And we'll link to everything in the show notes as well so people can find you. Awesome.
Okay.
Dr. Park, thank you so much for this amazing information. I'm really hoping that people enjoy our conversation about such an interesting and up and coming topic.
Absolutely. Thanks, Erica.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you.